You are listening to Nerd Best Friends because, honestly, you have something better to do than being a nerd?
Welcome back, nerds, and thank you for listening to the Nerd Best Friends podcast. I'm Annalise, here with my best friend, Rob.
That's me, your best friend, your podcast host, and your weird old guy sitting at the end of the bar. Sure, you think he works there because he's there every time you go in, but he doesn't seem to be doing any work.
Is he always wearing a shirt with a brewery?
He's got the brewery t-shirt.
Yeah.
He's got a big beard. He's sitting down at the end. You're like, is that guy, is he the owner? Does he work here? Who is this guy?
Just buy the guy a drink. So this podcast goes to 11. This is episode 11. We're going to nerd out today about craft beers. This is Rob's episode. This is the reason why Rob decided to do Nerd Best Friends.
I don't know about that. I am more nervous for this episode than even the Batman episode because I know that I don't know as much as I think I could know about craft beer. And I know that we have friends that know a lot about craft beer. Speaking of craft beer, the craft beer of the episode, I had to pick this out again. A lot of, we'll talk about this, I'm sure. A lot of the draw of craft beer is the fun names that they come up with for all of their beer.
Yes.
This beer is by Modern Times Brewery, and it is called Dungeon Map. This beer could not have sat on the shelf more enticing to me. It is called Dungeon Map. And it is a West Coast IPA, which is one of my favorite styles of beers. It is pretty hoppy. It's got some high IBUs or bitterness. It's delicious. The thing I like about Modern Times is they are a brewery out of San Diego, which of course means they know exactly how to make a West Coast IPA. Anytime you go into a Modern Times tasting room, the people pouring there, the people working there are always very happy, very excited to tell you about how happy they are working there, how all of the employees are share owners in the company, and how they have like just a nice culture of wanting Modern Times beer to be successful there. And so that's my craft beer of the episode.
That's wonderful. And I'm going to lodge a complaint to any brewmasters or breweries that might listen to this podcast or anyone who has friends that own breweries. I absolutely love the fun names. But as I've mentioned in previous episodes, the funner the name, the hoppier the beer. And not all of us are hoppy IPA fans and stout fans. Some of us like those lighter summer ale lagers, and those tend to have very weak names. Just because it's a weak beer doesn't mean it needs a weak name. So
is that true?
I'm putting that out there. I want some more fun names for the beers that aren't IPAs and stouts, but keep the fun names going because it's absolutely my favorite part of going to breweries and hanging out and just nerding out about these names and how fun they can get. So complaint, but also keep it coming.
When we talk about what makes a good and bad craft brewery experience, we can definitely check that one off the list.
For sure.
All right, before we get started, going into this week, listener mail, Annalise?
Yeah, the thing that's really happening right now and taking off for our podcast is a lot of interaction on our social media. So over not only winter break, but coming into the end of January, we've had a lot of interaction, particularly on some posts around our released episode dates. The one-shot mini holiday card that you did about Superman and Spider-Man nerding out about Warhammer got a lot of interaction all of a sudden. And I think that's just because it keeps coming back around as a topic. There's a lot of people who are really upset about how the audience and the host
Graham Norton,
thank you. They laughed at Henry Cavill. They laughed at him when he talked about Warhammer, and he was throwing down some knowledge. He's there's two parts of the experience. There's the preparation and the painting, and then there's the actual gameplay. Like, he was throwing out some really good stuff, and he was laughed at. So there's just some ongoing conversation, and we've received a lot of interaction around that one shot and around that post on our social media.
That dude is the real deal. He really paints his Warhammer armies and knows how to spend the time. He builds his own, gaming PCs and stuff. Like, he is one of us. He just happens to have a really cool job and work out for a living. He's pretty cool.
Do you follow him on social media? Does he have like pictures of him painting in his
Absolutely.
like trailers while he's on set and stuff?
I don't notice that it's any time that he's on set. It's gotta be during the downtime. You'll see pictures of his nerd room, right? His hobby desk and stuff where he's got his, green cut mat down and he's painting, or just pictures of his kitchen table with a big PC taken apart on it and stuff that he's rebuilding. So I think that's his. If I understand the world of big Hollywood actor, you work 100% all hours, go during the 6 months or whatever you're filming a movie. And then there might be a lot of time waiting around for your next gig. So I think that's how that works out for him. Graham Norton it's a comedy show. Right. He's going to be there to try to get the laughs. But in that particular case, I think why it's getting people are getting activated there is it still feels like punching down. Right. Even though we are in this time of, nerd renaissance, especially when it comes to comic book movies and when it comes to video game. I mean, The Witcher is a book and it's a video game and it's a Netflix series that Henry Cavill stars in and stuff. And it's super huge. So it seems like, nerd is cool. But for those of us who lived it, who are living it and being laughed at like that, it still feels like punching down,
Yeah. And well, now nerds have the ability on a global in your face level to push back on it. And that's why it became such a trending topic, because now nerds can say, hey, wait, this is a real thing. We're done being laughed at about it. And it's really interesting. I don't know if it's quite pushback. I don't know if it's quite as negative as maybe someone who might drop a racist comment in a live show. That's something viral. In this case, this is just nerds saying like, enough is enough. We have a valid hobby just because it's not lifting weights. And this is someone who does lift weights as a hobby, who does exercise and take care of himself. And it's still being laughed at. Like that shouldn't be a thing anymore in 21, 22.
Especially in the year of our Lord 2022, if you're someone who doesn't have a hobby, what have you been doing the last couple of years, right? Like, everybody was taking up hobbies, whether you were making sourdough or woodworking in your garage or, whatever things people were doing. Like, if you have been spending the last few years during the hard times, if you just spent that whole time sitting on your couch watching Netflix, I feel bad for you, right? You need a hobby. You need to get some done. Be creative.
And speaking of hobbies in 22, I want to thank those who have interacted with us about goals, whether you latched on to the 20 for 22 or just shared with us some of the things that you are doing in terms of New Year's quote unquote resolutions. Keep sharing with us, keep tagging us in your posts, and we're going to keep sharing with you as we move along our own 20 for 22 Trello board. So thanks for that interaction as well.
I'm close to moving my first board to mission accomplished, but
nice.
You'll know when it happens.
We'll post it. We'll be on top of it. We're going to talk about craft beer today.
Oh boy. Okay. So what is craft beer? Full disclosure, I am not a brewer. I am not an amateur brewer. I know that is another really cool creative hobby. There's a lot of science and chemistry and thought and organization, cool stuff that goes into that hobby. And I think it's commendable. I don't have the space or the equipment for that, although I think it would be really cool. So I am more of a craft beer enthusiast. I like to consider myself a beer snob. A little bit. Not that I know everything, but that I do only drink the craft beer, and craft is the most important part. This is beer that is made by a person, usually in a small facility, someone who is tasting the beer, someone who is experimenting with beer. Some of my favorite and the best ones that I come across, you can tell it was someone who got into beer. They started making their own beer, probably in their garage. They were doing really well at it, and they just kind of took that hobby and turned it up to 11, bought a space, opened up a tasting room. That's really fun, is when you find a place. There was a local place here a few years ago called Captain Fatty's. We always called it the elusive Captain Fatty's, because when they were first getting started, it was literally just a couple dudes making beer. So their tasting room was only open for a couple hours, a couple days a week, because that's all they had to produce. So every time we go there, they were closed because it wasn't Friday at 4 p.m. or whatever it was that they were open. That's what I like about it is unlike a lot of the commercial beers, a lot of the macro breweries and stuff where everything is kind of automated and it's made in a big factory and it's got the same exact, recipe that it's had for decades. What I have found, a lot of those will use preservatives and chemicals and coloring to support that macro production scale that they're doing. A craft beer is made by a person who is watching over that beer, making sure that it has that quality control, trying new things, tweaking and perfecting those recipes as it goes.
And that's been a really big shift. I don't even know if it's just in the United States, but maybe globally, that changed from the big companies, used to, you can go to the Coors, Colorado, Golden, Colorado,
Right.
Coors Brewery, and you walk through their big thing and you get a little cup to taste some of the beers right off the tap. In my travels overseas, there are pubs and other things, but it's a lot of just a bunch of beers that are regional for the country. I don't know how far back this trend has gotten. I think we had maybe brewery restaurants, maybe in the 70s, 80s, where they made their own beer in smaller amounts, but it was a restaurant and that was what brought you in. And you might have a couple beers, but that's been flipped and it's become a thing where, like you mentioned, the individual person who made this really good beer and people say, like, I would buy this. And then it got bigger and bigger and bigger until they open a storefront, but it's no longer that restaurant, right? You're going to have beer. And prior to the pandemic closures, a lot of that was just like, you just go have beer. And then things shifted, particularly in California where we are, where they had to offer food with it to be open and stuff like that shifted during the reopening of the pandemic. But that experience has changed.
Yes.
More beers, more types of beers, as you mentioned, cleaner beers, and the experience of beer drinking itself changed.
Absolutely. And that is, people will say like, oh, that's a hipster thing, right? That started in the last decade or so of like, oh, well, that's these hipsters, that's these millennials, that's these whatever. But really something changed there where there was, and there is an entrepreneurial experience, a spirit out there, that pendulum has gone up and down as it is, throughout time of what's the most important thing? Well, the most important thing is that you get a job at a good company that has lots of benefits and you have a steady paycheck and this. And then sometimes society shifts and it's go out there, strike out on your own and try to do something that you love and that is creative. And that pendulum goes back and forth. And I think craft beer is a product of the latter, where it was young people who are very knowledgeable about cooking, about chemistry, about business, and finding these big, relatively inexpensive commercial spaces. Your best craft breweries are always in these weird warehouse and machine districts because they've rented out some huge warehouse space for all of their stuff.
The byproduct of that as well, more beers. I won't even say a saturation because the beers that are made independently are different. A West Coast IPA from Brewery X is going to taste different than a West Coast IPA from Brewery Y. Like there's so much out there. So for someone like me who doesn't drink a whole lot of beer, that can become very overwhelming. Now you walk into a local store and you've got 6 display cases of different types of beers. And you have like 1 or 2 are those global brands like Budweiser and Coors and Corona. And then you have just cases and cases and cases of
more local stuff.
And what? Can you help me? Can you help our listeners? Tell us about craft beer.
So there are not a million, there are over 100 different kinds of beers, right, that you can get. So I'm going to kind of put these in broad strokes, in broad categories for people. So we're going to start with your pale ales, right? So there are English pale ales and there are American pale ales. A pale ale kind of has that pale color. It's going to be a little bit hoppier, thinner. An American pale ale is going to be a little bit hoppier, a little bit more bitter than an English pale ale would be. Then you have your IPAs, which is your India pale ales. So these are pale ales, but they're a lot hoppier. And fun fact, the reason why IPAs exist and why they're called India pale ales is because when they would brew that beer century ago, they would put more hops in that beer because it would help it stay fresher on the journey from England to India on their big ships that they would be traveling, right? Like that was a long journey. So the increase in hops kept things fresher for that journey to India, thus the India pale ale and the more hoppiness that it's known for.
So IPAs have been around for a while. It's not.
All of these beers have been around for a while. I think our
Okay.
first evidence of beer is in ancient Egypt. The ancient Egyptians were brewing beer and feeding it. It was so thick, right? Almost like bread, right? They would make bread and they would make beer kind of at the same time with the same kind of yeast and fermenting and stuff for their tremendous workforce that was building these pyramids, right? Because it was very filling, it was very cheap, and it was kept everybody kind of in a malaise.
And one of those things of using all of the materials you have, right? Like the hops or the yeast was used for one thing, and now we can reuse it and create this other thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That makes a lot of sense.
From the different breads and stuff they were making. Yeah.
So
then please.
Is it only hops that makes a difference in the taste between a pale ale and an IPA?
Generally speaking, yes, it's going to be that hoppiness or that bitterness that is going to make the difference. There's also probably going to be a stronger or higher alcohol content in your IPA. Again, traditionally to keep it fresher longer when it was in barrels.
But now we drink these colder than does that change the taste of the IPA as well?
I think it does. Now, when a brewer is tasting beer and monitoring their beer as they're making it, they're drinking it warm or hot, right? Because it's coming out of the fermenters or it's coming out of the tanks and those kinds of things. And I think when it is warm and in those processes, someone with a sophisticated tongue that knows what they're looking for can probably taste those things better. Culturally, we like cold beer, right? We just like that pressure, but that's not the same around the world, right? Okay. Many places in Europe and things will still traditionally like not warm, but like a room temperature or just slightly cool beer.
And it's like that for more than just beer beverages in European
I think
countries.
That's right. Yeah. Or putting ice into,
ice
your soda
isn't a thing in a lot of places.
Right.
Yeah. All right. I'm sorry. I interrupted. I had a ton of questions because I guess I never made a connection between pale ale and IPA as a pale ale, because I don't mind a pale ale. It's not my first. It's not my go-to. I don't mind the taste of a pale ale. I just don't like the bitter and the hoppy of IPAs. And I've tasted some that are okay, but I've never tasted one that I could drink a whole pint of.
Oh, interesting. Oh, for an IPA?
For an IPA,
they're going to be strong. They're going to be strong, and they're going to have that kind of green or resiny flavor. Right. There are definitely some breweries that lean into that. Like, oh, well, an IPA, people expect it to be a little hoppier, a little stronger. We're going to lean into that and make the hoppiest, strongest one you've ever tasted. It's like, okay, well, that's fine. But also, there could be some subtlety within it. One of the reasons I put pale ale first is because I think that's a great starting point for people trying craft beer. If you are just kind of getting into beer and you're like, well, what's a craft beer when I go to this weird hipster brewery that my friend took me to and I'm looking down the thing? I think the tendency for some people is to start with something that's very sweet or masks the flavor of beer. But I think if you're going to a craft brewery, you want to taste the beer in the beer. And I think a pale ale is like a good starting place if you want to taste like, well, what is craft beer taste like? All I drink is White Claw. What does a craft beer taste like? A pale ale, I think, is a good place to start, because you're going to get that hop that it's known for, but it's also going to be a clean and not too overpowering beer.
I'm back standing in front of all these displays of beer, and I see West Coast IPA, double IPA, hazy IPA. Like, what is this?
Okay, so all of them are going to be a stronger, hoppier flavor than your lager or your pale ale. Okay. But Imperial IPA is going to be strong. They're going to crank up the alcohol content. That's where you're going to see, like your macro beer is going to be around 4% alcohol. When you get into things like an Imperial IPA, you're going to see it climbing up to like 9% alcohol.
Oh, geez.
Right? And you'll also see things like double IPAs will have a high alcohol content like that. A West Coast IPA is really, I always describe it as kind of green, although I know that that's not like an official flavor profile. It's almost like you can taste a hop still, a hop or a malt still on the plant, right? Like if you were going to bite into, the stem of that plant and have that kind of like green and fresh taste, that's what I'm looking for in a West Coast IPA, as opposed to say like,
it doesn't sound like fresh to me. It's why I don't drink tea. It tastes like plant. But no, I hear, like, I'm meaning no offense to anyone who likes IPAs. It's just not a thing for me.
Tea is an interesting comparison, because yes, you're going to, when you're drinking tea, tea and trying different teas, you're looking for the different notes of whatever that blend is or whatever that leaf is that they used. It's the same for hops, whether it's Citra hops, Cascade hops, Mosaic hops. There's all these different varieties like there are for any plant, and they will have different subtle flavors in their combination. Something else that's really popular with the IPAs are the hazy IPAs, where they are, it's a literal descriptor. If you hold up the glass
What
to
it
the
looks
light
like.
and
Right,
you look through,
right.
it is very hazy. Whatever process it is that they use to make those hazies, they put in extra flavors kind of in there. You'll hear more like tropical flavors, fruity flavors.
Oh, okay.
And that's not to say that they taste like, they're subtle. It's not like when you would get, say, oh, I'm going to get like a cherry high C. It's not that kind of overpowering fruit, right? There's the note, there's a hint of different fruit or tropical flavors in there. And I think that them actually putting fruit into whatever, the steps in the process in there is also what's giving it that hazy feel, because there's more sediments, there's more ingredients and things in there taking up that space. That takes us to ales, straight up ales,
Yes.
one of the oldest types of beer. And what I understand from the history of ales is that ales were brewed to be paired with food. So when you see things like a red ale, which might have a clean or toasty taste to it, it's like more of a palate cleanser, where a brown ale is going to have a nutty kind of background to it that's going to pair with different sorts of foods. Oh gosh, your Oktoberfests, your Dunkels, a lot of your Belgian beers and stuff that you're drinking have more of a sweet, thin taste to them because you're eating a bunch of fried food. You're at Oktoberfest, and you're having your hot dogs and your donuts and all the different things. Those are beers that are brewed to be paired with food.
See, now you're talking my jams here. Red ales were my favorite for a long time. Irish reds were my go-to. I love Oktoberfest. I'm going to twist what you're saying there. You go to Oktoberfest, you're not eating hot dogs and donuts. You're eating bratwurst. You're eating schnitzel. You're eating, probably fries is the most fried they get. But let's be real. The Germans aren't selling donuts at Oktoberfest. They're selling giant jugs of beer with some schnitzel and some sauerkraut
pretzels
on their bratwurst. Oh, pretzels. Oh, my favorite thing in the month I spent in Germany was a beer and a pretzel, because my goodness, you've never had such a good pretzel. I swear. Yeah. Anyways, Oktoberfest, I love that. But that's a beer interesting to me. If I'm just kind of looking inward at myself, those are beers that I can drink just as a beer. I'm having a beer. I can have an Oktoberfest. I don't ever consider that being connected to food, but now it makes so much sense why it's more palatable than an IPA that's intended to be sipped on after a hard day of work to fill your
in
palate.
and of itself, right?
Yeah.
An IPA is a beer that you're going to your hipster craft brewery place to have that beer and taste that beer as its own thing. But yeah, I think you're going to listen to this list and you can kind of check it off in your mind.
Yeah.
Irish reds, brown ales, Doppelbocks, Dunkels, Altbier, Marzen, double triples sound like
that sounds like if you go to my Untapped, that's my list right there for the most part.
Right. So that is ales. And of course, that's a handful of the hundreds of different kinds of ales and all their different subtleties that go along with there. Another category I wanted to highlight was the wheat beers. Wheat beers are interesting because there's wheat in them, right? When you're looking at the yeast and the bread products of it and stuff, it's more of it's got a soft flavor. They're more yellow for some reason. Like if you can picture holding up that glass and it being not quite that golden of a beer, but a very yellow beer. We're talking about Hefeweizens, Huits, farmhouse ales, saisons, things like that. They can also be kind of cloudy. One of the things that puts me a little off from them sometimes is that they will have a lot of sediment in them sometimes. And you pour it and you're looking at it and it's got like the floaters kind of sinking to the bottom from that process of the different kinds of yeast and things in there. And like, I don't even like pulping my orange juice. So they kind of all like sit off the top.
They get
a little
textury.
Chewy. Yeah, a little
and
mouthfeel.
Not exactly enjoyable.
They're very enjoyable for a lot of people, especially a good farmhouse ale or saison on a summer day is very delicious.
Fair enough.
Lagers, very popular as far as like the macro brews and things that we might be used to in the United States are your lagers. There's tons of different kinds, right? There's the American lager, which is your standard in a lot of bars for a lot of the last few decades. But of course, there's every kind of culture or different area, region of the world has their kind of take on the lager, and they're all a little bit different. There's Vienna lagers, there's Japanese rice lagers, there's German pilsners, there's Mexican lagers that usually have like a little lime or lemon in them, Helles, Kolsch's, cream ales, your favorite, even a blonde ale kind of, falls
Honey
into
ale,
it, kind
yeah.
of straddles the line between an ale and a lager, but technically is still a lager, the way they brew it, I guess.
Now you're really talking my jam. When I walk into a craft brewery, this is the first place I go. 805 is my favorite beer. It's a honey lager, honey ale.
Honey
It's
blonde ale, yeah.
German Pilsner is my favorite. Kolsch. I'm a sucker for Kolsch's. You know this, listeners. You ever want to buy me a beer? A Kolsch will go a long way with me. That's my absolute favorite. This is where I live. I like ales. I've got to be in the mood for something darker and heavier. I'll take a lager any day.
Yeah, lagers are great. I love a Mexican lager. Especially if I find a Mexican restaurant that, it's not just Corona, but they have like a local brewery's version of a Mexican lager. Oh, that is a place I will come back again. Love Pilsners, especially, a craft Pilsner. Like when you were in college and you had that Pabst Blue Ribbon and you're like, oh man, this is rough. And then you have like a good craft Pilsner. You're like, oh, this is what it was supposed to be like. It's so good.
A local brewery for us here, Draftsman, has a Japanese rice lager that I like a lot.
So that takes us to the next category. Again, it's very broad strokes, but we'll go to sours. Now, sours was something that got popular more recently after I kind of, really got into craft beer. Sours became more popular. So I kind of assumed that they were something maybe new or, something experimental. But no, they've been around. They're as old as beer themselves.
Oh,
sours have been. Yeah. That was new information that I got researching this. A lot of times you will find sours listed on menus as wilds. And that's not because they're like X-TREME. It's because the yeast that they use is wild yeast, much like if, so many of our friends took up making sourdough during the pandemic, know that you've got your yeast and you've got to keep that starter alive, right? And so you feed that starter and it lives in your house, and you can split that starter and you could give it to somebody else. And after 6 months, after a year, your bread and that other person's bread who maybe lives in a different city are going to taste different because the yeast has absorbed so many different elements of its environment as it is a living and changing thing. So that's why sours, that's why they're called wilds, is because they're made with wild yeast. And these are beers that are very flavorful. They will have not just like fruit, but also floral tastes that are strong. Belgians, Gozes, Philanders, Bretts are examples of some sours. You'll even see them listed sometimes as different flavors, right? Mango sour, a kiwi sour, because they've used techniques to give you a strong taste of whatever that might be, along with that very sour taste, which is, of course, in contrast to the bitterness that you get in traditional types of beers that we've been talking about. That contradiction is why I have not found a sour that I really like.
I might have liked sours when we were younger, but now it's like trying to drink Sour Patch Kids that I used to just pop. I used to eat Sour Patch Kids like they were nothing. And now like it's like tasting those and I don't want to.
Yeah, a lot of the enjoyment I get. I, as a person, don't have much of a sweet tooth. I enjoy delicious things, but hey, there's cake in the break room does not make me kick over my chair and go running, right? Like I could care less. So part of my love for craft beer is, I'm more of a savory type guy, and like those hops and that kind of bitterness is what I go for. And sours don't have that. Right. They specifically are made differently. That takes us to porters and stouts. These are your dark beers, right? When you see the beer glass come down and it's, super dark brown or black looking, and even the froth, the foam on top is more of a brown or caramel color. These are your dark beers, your porters, your stouts. They are similar. I learned the difference between a porter and a stout is that porters are made with malted barley, while stouts use roasted barley. This is why, in general, a porter might be a little sweeter or a little bit boozier because of that malted a bit, while a stout might be described, a lot of times you'll hear them described as like a coffee flavor or unsweetened chocolate or something. And that's because those hops are roasted, which helps bring out those different kinds of flavors depending on what kind of things that they're putting in there. These are your Irish stouts, your Guinness, and things like that. Milk stouts, your Russian Imperial stouts. That's a strong beer. You only need one? Go for your Russian Imperial stout. It'll fill you up like a meal and get you buzzed like you had had 3.
Is it safe to say that Guinness is the most like widely known of
Absolutely.
this type? Like most people would know what
popular.
That is.
Yeah, that's a worldwide macro. I might regret saying this. Nerd corrections, you can write in. I think Guinness is made by Budweiser.
It might be now.
Yeah.
It sounds familiar that the company was bought out by one of the large conglomerates, right? Yeah. And now it's made by someone. They're still made in Ireland, but owned by someone else. To make sure I understood, something like a stout where you not always, but some of the descriptions might be, coffee and cherry. It means that those elements of some sort, whether it's actual chocolate or actual coffee or actual fruit, is placed as part of the process.
Absolutely. Right? Yes. And
it's not that it just...
that, and those are more bitter flavors, right? In that case, by using the roasted hops, that roasted flavor is what's drawing out the more, whatever that acid is or whatever that's going to give you that more bitter taste of a coffee or a cacao or something like that, rather than something sweet and malted like the other kind.
Like an IPA for me, I've enjoyed these that I've tried. I have yet to meet one that I could drink a pint of. And part of that is I get so full so fast. And to me, it's not enjoyable to feel that full off of one beer, right? But I have enjoyed tasting different stouts and tasting some of these darker beers. Oh, the boozy ones are tough though. Boozy ones.
I'm always, when I think of my craft beer drinking, I think of, a warm, sunny afternoon at a craft brewery, hanging out with friends and family, in the evening or whatever. And I've got like a crisp, cold glass of a pale ale or an IPA in my hand. I am always surprised when I go through my Untapped or get to they give you the end of the year stats and like all this kind of things. How many stouts and porters, mostly stouts, I have tried throughout the year. I guess it's just part of being a craft beer fan. You try whatever's new. I always end up with a big long list of those. So.
Thank you, Rob, for the quick umbrella overview. I will repeat what you said. Like that's just a broad stroke of what you look at with craft beer. For me, at least, and I think for a lot of people, it is about the experience of going to a brewery, not necessarily a restaurant that has its own craft beer, but to go to a brewery. That experience is so unique. So let's talk about that. What makes a good craft brewery experience?
So I was coming up with a list for this and it was fun because it was like, oh yeah, this is why I like this. This is why I like this vibe. This is why I like this vibe. Number 1 on my list, a craft brewery is not a bar. It's not dark. It's not loud. It's not full of young people trying to get drunk for cheap. It is a much different atmosphere. It is a place of, it's more blue collar. Like the best craft breweries are the places where they're making the beer there. This is 3rd on my list was the beer is brewed on site, right? Like when you roll up to a real craft brewery, it stinks, right? It smells funky because there's things fermenting and mashing and vents being, let go and stuff.
Right.
Like, oh, this is a place where the beer is made. The people in this building where I'm going to drink the beer are responsible for this beer, created this beer. They're tasting, they're the quality control. This is a real small craft place.
Right.
The other thing that I like about that kind of vibe is, at least out here in California, we're very lucky that we have very good weather. So a lot of these places have big outdoor spaces to enjoy that for their seating. And what you get is, I would call it like a picnic type atmosphere. It's daytime, it's sunny, there's different people, they're kind of scattered about, but you see families, you see dogs. Everybody's just kind of there to chill. It's not as formal as a restaurant type bar. And it certainly doesn't have that like, well, you can't bring your dog in here. You can't bring your kid in here. That would be inappropriate to bring them to a bar where drunk people are trying to hook up with each other. It has that sort of picnic type atmosphere.
And we certainly have a few of these really great places here locally. What's the one in Carpinteria that faces the ocean?
Islands.
My
gosh.
One of my favorites. I really love that place. You sit and it's beautiful weather and you're outdoors. And to echo some of what you said, people can bring food from outside. You can bring sandwiches you made from home if you want. That's what's really fun about the one in Ventura that bookended to Toppers, because you can get a pizza and salad from Toppers and go over to the brewery, get a beer, and you have that outdoor experience right in the middle of those two buildings. Also here we have M Special. I live in walking distance from M Special, and that wonderful patio outside. As we got a dog in October, so we've had her for a few months now, and now starting to integrate the training of being able to just chill at a craft brewery, walk over.
The dog walk is now the walk to and from the brewery.
Sometimes it's a good 2-mile walk, which tires are out, right? And then she gets to be around people. But about M Special, they make, I don't know where it would fall on this list. I guess it's technically a lager maybe, but they make a beer over the summer and into the fall called the Rattler. It's spelled Radler. It is, I know it of German descent, so Rattler, more of a T sound, which is like a blonde lager, or am I saying the right thing there? Lighter lager.
I'm trying to remember exactly if they use a lager.
It's their lager. I think it's the M Special lager. And then they add a little bit of
additionally, if you were to get it in Germany, it would be made with a German Pilsner, which falls under the lager umbrella. Yes.
Right.
That's what I was trying to remember.
That's actually where I had it first. I had one with lemonade or lemon seltzer water, and then one with apple juice. And I'm not even going to try to pronounce it, but they're so refreshing because I was in Germany a number of years ago over the summer. So it's super hot and we go on lots of walks and sit down at an open air restaurant or kind of a brewery. It's not the same exact experience as we're describing here, and sat down and had one of these, and it's one of the most refreshing drinks. But M Special makes one and I love it. So we walk over, have a beer, walk back. It's really, I love that atmosphere. Even when they're busy, it doesn't feel like what it felt like in our 20s to try to go to a bar and have a drink. And I also really enjoy that.
And that was something that we don't have locally around us as much, is like the good pub, right? So when you talk about those experiences in Germany and stuff, like there's a neighborhood pub and it's not a big dark bar. Right. It's just a place where you go and like drink and it's pretty chill, right? It's like a good pub experience. They might have darts, they might have a pool table, that kind of vibe. And I don't know that we have a lot of that around here, or at least I didn't really find any when I was younger until the craft brewery phase exploded. And then there were like all these super chill, cool places to drink where that the beer is going to be good. Because if it's not, you could go tell the guy, hey, how come this tastes different than last time? And he'll be like, oh, well, the shipping changed and we got different hops. Or he'll be like, oh, I was trying something new. And because a lot of these places started out as nerds in their garage making their own beer, they're very happy to talk about their beer and what they're doing and how they've changed things and where they've come from. And I like that experience again very much. One of the things on my list for what makes a good craft brewery is it's not too hipster, right? Sometimes you roll up on a tasting room, like, I don't need your waxed mustache. I don't need things to come in like a cocktail glass with a half a watermelon hanging off it or anything. Like, I want to be there with the guy. Like, when I walk in, I want to see dudes with like big rubber boots, wellies, and a dirty t-shirt and a sweat stained hat because he's been back there brewing beer all day and now he's going to come pour some for you and give you a story.
Well, there is some kind of hipster. There's one of our local breweries here. You can go buy the used barley to make bread. There's some hipster level there, but it is not that pressure to visually look. It's not that pressure to
Yeah.
fit in a category. You can walk into the brewery, you'll see a family with a couple kids, and the kids are playing games and eating some food while the parents are having a drink. And you're going to have like some people after work in one corner, and you have like the trivia people over there. And you go outside and there's some people with their dogs hanging out. Like it's a lot more relaxed of an atmosphere versus that hipster idea that you're talking about.
Yeah, that's also something. It's kind of fun when a brewery will have a gimmick, right? Not always, but a lot of them will have like, oh, this is the place to come for trivia on Wednesday nights.
Yeah.
I went to a cool space during our trip to Colorado where it was just full of pinball machines. And so it was Craft Brewery, and the whole back half was pinball. I spent many dollars and quarters playing all the different pinball games, while having a craft beer. There are places that'll have a big outdoor game session where they'll have giant Jenga and cornhole and all those kinds of things. So I'm going there for the beer, but also I know that there's something to keep me engaged at the same time. Right.
Well, one of my favorite things prior to the pandemic, and I haven't been back since. I know they started again. So shout out here to the Santa Barbara Yoga Collective. They would host yoga sessions in these breweries in off locations up on a balcony outside in the patio, where for $10, you'd get an hour-long session of yoga and a pint of beer after. And that was one of my favorite things to do once a week pre-pandemic, was to go to their yoga and beer sessions. And maybe that's something I need to start up again in 2022 and find out where they're hosting their sessions, because that was one of my favorite things.
Yeah. So Maria told me that they were doing that again, but they were doing it out in the parking lot, and she wasn't super jazzed about putting her fancy expensive yoga mat out on like the dirty asphalt kind of thing.
Now this new wave of everything coming back around, and once we can safely do it inside and back like on the better ground, I'm down for it too. Is on asphalt and on cement. And that just didn't sound like, for those of us, in our 40s, being on your hands and knees, even in a yoga mat on the cement, just doesn't sound like fun. So a big shout out to them. They do a great job, great sessions. And once we can safely move back inside, I'm down. I'm ready to go back.
So is there anything else on your list of what makes a good craft brewery experience?
Yes. Let me tell you my favorite part of going to a craft brewery: the flights. Because
yes,
I am not the person to sit and have a pint of IPA, a pint of a stout, a pint of a lager. I can't drink that much, and I shouldn't drink that much with my diabetes. That doesn't mean I don't want to try things. Now, and I may never, ever find an IPA that I could drink a pint of, but I am sure it's going to keep trying them. That's one of my favorite things to do. So the flights are amazing. And I remember earlier on, whether it was a restaurant or a brewery, flights used to be these pre-prescribed, like, for this much money, you get 6 tasters. And My favorite is when they say, well, you can choose any 6 for this amount, and I can sit there and some of these places have extensive lists of beers depending on how long they've been in business, and you can sit there and choose. Although one of my absolute favorite ones, when we went to Oregon in June of 2021, my partner and I went to Oregon, and we went to a few breweries. One of them was this flight of like 22 beers. I think you've seen the picture of me holding this like rainbow display of all of these tasters.
Yes.
It was like there was like every beer that they had available at this brewery.
Yes,
I think it was 10 Barrel Brewing, and it was amazing. So my partner and I we tasted it. I mean, we got a little toasty just from the tasters, but I got to try a whole bunch of different things, and help me know that when you were reading off these, like, okay, I have tried this. Oh, I have tried it. Oh, that's why that tastes like that. So the flights is my favorite part, to like the social aspect, to sit there. I love going to breweries with you, best friend, and just sit there and just taste and talk. And we talk a lot of nonsense and foolery, but just to sit there.
I could not agree more. The flights are part of the fun, because the fun part is you want to try what's new, and you want to recognize the craft and see what they're doing there. And, there are a lot of beers where you can taste, you can read the description of what it is and what they're going for. You can taste it. It can be very successful in what they were trying to do, but also you might not ever drink that beer again because you didn't like it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so we have a lot of fun using the Untapped app, keeping track of the different things that we've tasted and kind of making notes and things about that, which is always, but yeah, the flights, excellent addition to the list.
And I will say I struggle sometimes because I have my favorites. So if we go out to Buellton or Paso, I'm not really interested in trying a flight of Firestone beer. I want that 805 right from the teat, right from the source. I want it right there. And like, you're not going to convince me like, oh, try this, the barrel, blah, blah, blah. No, give me my 805 to the extent that like, it is so much better from the source. And we know that of craft beer. There was one time I went to fill up a growler of 805 and the guy working there was like, it's like $2 cheaper if you just get a 12 pack instead of this or a 6-pack, whatever it was. If you go get this pack from the fridge instead of this growler. And I said, you work here, right? And he kind of looked at me and I'm like, it tastes better from the tap. I will pay the extra $2. Yep. He's like, all right. But like, so perfect. I struggle. Like the flights is so fun, but also when I find the one I like, take me to Buellton. Actually, we haven't gone in a while. We should go and just have a couple drinks, and it's good food there. And so I also have my favorites. Like when I go to Firestone, I'm going to have an 805 and I'm going to have some good food and I'm not going to do a flight. But the most other places, going in and trying something new and trying a whole bunch of something new is really fun.
That is indeed a balance that you have to find. Like I know what my favorite is, but also there's something new and I can't drink them all. Or can I?
Or can I try? Well, I've seen you struggle with that too. Last time I was at this brewery, they had that and I rated it 5 and I really liked it, but they also have this.
But now there's this new one.
I'm going to have a silly name. Both. I've got to tag the new one and have the old one.
Exactly.
Which actually has also been helpful. I noticed breweries now, they don't just offer the pint and then the gigantic and then the growler. Some of them are now doing like a $2, 3-ounce
half pints.
Yeah, even less than that.
Yeah, the tasters,
yeah. So that's been really helpful too. That's helped someone like me. I go to a Firestone and I'm going to have my 805, but now they have a 3-ounce. I can taste that and still have my 805. So that's been very, very smart of the breweries as well.
Did we make it through craft beer?
That was great. That was great.
I was nervous. Hopefully I didn't sound like too much of a noob talking about the different craft beers. I know that our craft beer nerds are going to be like, oh, Rob, I can't believe you put that in that category and didn't talk about this.
Look, I think it's perfect because we are nerding out about it without being experts, because that's kind of the fun of being nerds, right?
That's right.
We don't have to be the all knowledgeable. We enjoy this experience and go and have a few drinks, and in the pandemic, making our own brew fests at home with our little like safe pandemic circle was something valuable and fun, and that I will continue doing even out of the pandemic. We are full of beer, Rob. Thank you for all that craft brew knowledge and nerdiness. What's the nerdiest thing you did this week?
Oh, man. Okay. So the final card, last episode, we talked about our Trello boards and our 22s for 22s. Well, the last card I moved over on my 21 for 21 board was completing all 3 boxes of the Batman Gotham Chronicles miniature board game. What this allowed us to do was, since we had everything painted and ready to go, there are different versions of the game. There's game modes. So in the traditional main game is a one versus many style, where one player operates a board full of the bad guys, right? So whatever the mission calls for, you might be the Joker and Harley Quinn and some like thugs, and they're planting bombs around the city. And then the players are the heroes, right? So somebody might be Batman and somebody might be Nightwing, whatever. And so it's a one versus many where they have objectives and you have an objective and you take turns going through, which is fine. But once we kind of had everything available to us, we unlocked the versus mode, which is like a 1v1, turns it into a miniature skirmish game, like a battle game. So one person takes on the bad guy side and one person is the good guy side. And from all the different cards and minis, you draft your force, right? So depending on, and it gives you a scenario, and depending on the scenario, you're like, oh, okay, well, this guy's, this one, they're hacking into computers. So I got to make sure that I pick guys that are good at computers or whatever and things like that. So for this one, I'm going to be Two-Face and I'm going to be Killer Croc. And then I'm going to throw in the Penguin's goons. And then I'm going to grab Clayface. And on the other side, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to be Nightwing and I'm going to be Batgirl and I'm going to grab Commissioner Gordon and I'm going to put cops with big shields, like riot cops on my team. And then you set them all up on the board. But this is by far the preferred way to play this game. It was so much fun where the one versus many is pretty fiddly. It's pretty long and, there's a lot of rules and different steps to remember kind of going through. This really streamlines the experience. You're playing with all these cool painted models. It's a property that, most people recognize as far as like the Batman lore and stuff like that. So we played as many games as we could fit in of Batman, Gotham City Chronicles, trading up our forces and doing that. So that was a blast.
Nice.
How about you?
So for me, there's this thing that I've been sort of working on for a long time. As a reminder to our listeners, I was a music educator for 19 years, and I was very lucky that early in my career and throughout my career, I had some really great mentors and really great training on the thing that is missing when music teachers get their degree to become a teacher. A lot of what they learn is about pedagogy, is about becoming a phenomenal musician and ear training skills and music history and music theory and all the things that you need to be a great musician in order to then become a teacher. The thing that's missing from a lot of music education programs across the country for those who are trying to get a degree and become a music teacher is the logistical side of being a director. One of the reasons why I'm an administrator is because of the parallels between being a band director and being a principal. There are so many parallels. You're a smaller version of running a school. You're running your program, and it's an organizational thing. It's a living being, and you have to be savvy and knowledgeable about how to work with parent volunteers and your boosters, how to speak financially to your administrators, how to advocate for your program in the public, how to do PR, how to train and hire and fire your staff, how to communicate. I mean, it's just, there's so, and finances. Now you're in charge of a big budget. Now you have boosters who raise you six figures to run your program, and they have their own set of rules, especially if they're a 501c3. And it goes on and on and on. This logistics or the business side of being a music educator is largely ignored in programs. So all that to say, one of my underlining projects for a very long time now is kind of writing a book, writing a course that kind of covers this for people who are on that last semester before student teaching or last semester before they go into their own program, to just touch base on a lot of this. And with the digital content delivery tools that we have now, I am considering and have been taking, instead of chapters of a book, modules that can be delivered digitally and therefore available to a wider audience than me flying to such and such college to do a
seminar or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So I've been working on that a little bit with whatever little time I have, but it's a passion project of mine. I don't know if it'll ever get completed. There are some people around the country that are much bigger names in music education, or that are actually names in music education versus me, that have touched upon it at conferences. I do still think, even after all this time, there's a gap there where I see a lot of young music teachers struggle exactly in this realm, because they're phenomenal musicians. They are good at being a people person, and they don't have that logistical organizational brain, which was something I was naturally very good at, thankfully, and made that part easy for me, and also made it make sense to become an administrator. So I've been working on that as a kind of a side passion project. What about next week? What's the nerdiest thing you're going to do next week?
Next week is all about deck builder games. So tabletop gaming wise, a genre of that is the deck builder. If you're not familiar, it's a card game. There's just hundreds of cards, and they will start out kind of as a community stack, right? A giant deck of cards in the middle of the board. And you've got a couple things and a couple cards. And on those cards, usually there will be numbers or points values. This is worth this many points. This one's worth this few points, etc. And you lay out what they usually call a river of cards, 5 to 7 cards out there. And these cards are for sale, supposedly. So it comes around to your turn. You look at the cards in your hand that have the different numeric values. You add those up. Okay, I've got one with a 3. I've got one with a 2. I've got one with a 1. I have 6 points. I can buy 6 points worth of cards from the river. So I'm going to take one that was worth 4, and I'm going to buy one that was worth 2. And that now goes into my deck, and everybody else gets a turn to buy things, and more cards from that big stack are put down. Next time it comes to me, I've shuffled through my new deck that I built last turn. I've got new cards. I'm buying more. As you go through, these cards not only just buy other cards, but they have other abilities that either somehow hurt the people that you're playing with, right? If it's a competitive game and you're trying to like knock them out or take away their health points or whatever it might be, you'll play effects on other players at the same time as buying more cards for your deck. Or many of them are cooperative, where everyone around the table is playing cards that have different, abilities or powers that affect something that the game is providing, some sort of artificial intelligence or something on there. So that's a deck builder game. I think I like deck builder games, but I keep running across ones that I don't like. But I did last month, got a couple new ones for Christmas. I got the nostalgia to the max. I got the G.I. Joe deck builder game and the Transformers deck builder game.
Oh my gosh.
They're both made by the same company, but a cursory look through the rule book seems like they're pretty different mechanically. I already have an inclination of which one I'm going to like better, but we'll see how it goes once we actually like get into it and play it. The deck builder game that I love and want to just recommend to everyone, if you're thinking about like, oh, what's the next tabletop game I should get into? Or, oh, I've heard about deck builders before, what's the one to get into? Is the DC deck builder game. It is simple. It is streamlined. There are a bunch of different versions of it. Like if you can't find the original one from 10 years ago, there's another one with a different like DC logo on it, right? It might be Young Justice or it might be Teen Titans or whatever, but the gameplay is going to be the same and it's going to have all those DC comic heroes on it. Super simple to learn and pick up. It is a go-to game for our family whenever we're looking for like something. We want to play some tabletop games. We're not really interested in like having the brain space to do something new. That one comes off the shelf more than any other.
I've played that with you, right?
I'm sure you have.
Yeah, so I want to upvote that. Yes, for someone who doesn't play a lot of deck builder games, really easy to pick up on this one, and it's still a good game. It's not like, oh, it's easy, this can be done quick. It's a good game that
you got to use your strategy,
really like
and you got to like think about the cards that you're picking up. A lot of ones that I've played since then are just really fiddly. They try to overcomplicate it with like, well, there's different kinds of decks and there's all these little cardboard tokens now. And it's like, I came here for the deck builder. I don't need the meeples, Right. I keep experimenting with those. And again, I got 2 new ones. So I'm hoping this week we'll get to at least one of the new ones.
Nice.
How about you?
On our end, we're going to nerd out about California and surrounding states a little bit. We are running out of time of having Frida from Norway. She leaves at the beginning of June. And we've been hampered a little bit with the ongoing of COVID in that we've backed out of a little bit of travel to show her some things just to be safe. So now we're going to spend this week planning out. We're at the end of January. So we've got February, March, April, and May to kind of try to plan out some day trips or maybe overnight trips that we can do, like drive out to the Grand Canyon, go down to San Diego. Solvang is a day trip. We canceled during winter break because the variant got a little wild and we felt it was best to just stay home. There are some things along those lines we want to make sure Frida experiences, and also asking her what are some things you wanted to see. And we've taken her to a couple already just since we've had her back in September, to really try to figure out some places we can take her and stay safe and show her some parts of America before she goes home to Norway.
What a fun excuse to go do cool things around where you live, because a lot of times we take it for granted,
Yes. And that's one of my travel boards, right? Like go on.
Excellent. I was going to ask, and how are you organizing these trips?
That's been one I've achieved even during the pandemic year. I think the pandemic year is travel 2 times, and I was able to do both of those travels before the pandemic hit. So that's been a thing the entire time on all of my travel boards. So we'll continue that. But in this case, with the lens of we've got someone from a foreign country who has a limited amount of time, and we want to make sure that we show her as much as we can before she has to go home.
All right. So next episode, we are going to continue our series of I think I've seen this before, with a different pair of movies that came out the same year. If you're someone who has kids or you like animated movies, you might have gone out to the theaters and seen these 2 movies. And I wonder if you also thought, these are the same movie. So we'll check that out coming up on our next episode of Nerd Best Friends.
Do you have something to say about this episode? Join in on the conversation by following us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all at Nerd Best Friends, or send us a message by writing to podcast@nerdbestfriends.com. Please make sure to listen, subscribe, follow, share our podcast, and please give us that 5-star rating. We know you love us, nerds.
We appreciate it. As always, wonderful talking to you, Annalise. Thank you so much.
Same to you, best friend, and listeners, we'll see you in 2 weeks.
wait, I don't have a I don't have a cute opening.
All right, Rob. Enough
Tale
about
is-
beer.
oh, enough
Oh,
about
no,
beer.
Go ahead. No. What are you going to say?
I don't know, something cheesy like tale as old as time, friends and family coming together over alcohol.
There is no better